Hello and welcome to Washington Exec's video series. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with Washington Exec, and joining me today is David Egts, Chief Technologist and Senior Director of the Office of the Chief Technologist for Red Hat's North America Public Sector. Welcome back, Dave.
Yeah, glad to be here, Amanda.
All right. So in December, we know President Biden released the executive order on transforming federal customer experience and service delivery to rebuild trust in government. So, David, I'd like to talk with you about putting people first and digitizing government agencies. What are
Mhm.
some of the key components and foundations of customer experience vision for government?
Yeah, well, I think that if we take a look at it, since the beginning of the pandemic, customer experience on the private sector side has greatly improved, and I'm sure everybody watching this has noticed how like the video conferencing has really like there's that competition to improve and leapfrog each other, and the chat systems that we've had have greatly improved, and I think what's happening is that. In the same way that the customer experience on the private sector has been increasing, on the public sector, uh, they need to catch up too, and not only just modernizing and also the innovating. And so you just can't take a legacy application and declare it modernized by lifting and shifting it to the cloud. What you really need to do is take a good look at that application and make sure that it is delivering the right customer experience and is delivering customer satisfaction as well.
Mhm. All right, makes sense. So, what does it mean for agencies to put accessibility and equity first?
Yeah, and I think this is the difference between the public sector and the private sector, right? Where on the private sector side, customer success and customer experience is measured. The outcome is profitability of the organization, right? That more people are using it and people are getting more out of it. But in the case of the public sector, it's the profitability is not the motive. It's about the success of the people that are using those government services, and making sure that there is equitability in the access to those services. So, like for example, um, government services, by definition, are often needed by people that need help, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of these people that are needing the help are disabled, right? Or they may not afford have the means to afford a family PC and use a website that is not mobile friendly, or they may live in a rural area that may not have broadband access, and all this rich content is coming down to them that makes the website really unusable. So I think what agencies really need to do is, as they're modernizing, as they're innovating, they need to factor in reaching these folks to make sure that part of the success criteria is to ensure that everybody has equitable access. So, and this also goes to accessibility too. I would say that a lot of times, just like documentation, accessibility is factored in at the end if time's available, right?
Mhm.
And especially when we think about delivering government services, that accessibility needs to be built in as part of the design. It needs to be user centric. People need to be focused on that. You need to have test groups that make sure that the services that people are going for digitally through the digital services
Mhm.
are useful and usable by them. And the other thing too is that when we think about like we're talking about uh, the outputs or the outcomes that people see within the private sector, if it's profitability, on the public sector side, you may have things like the outputs that you're measuring is like, here are all the government services that I provided, and isn't it great that I provided even more services with this improved website. The reality is, though, is that we need to also be looking at the outcomes as well. And so you can't just solely measure the outputs uh, of the services delivered. You want to measure the outcomes as well, where maybe what happens is those people that receive the services no longer need them. And so the demand for those services go down as a result of a successful deployment of those services as people get back on their feet.
Mhm. Makes sense. And we talk so much about baking security into certain
Mhm.
technologies and services at the start. So now it's baking accessibility and equity in from the start. So that's an interesting point. So
Yeah.
along with accessibility, how can agencies continue to modernize and digitize processes with advanced technologies like AI, for example, while building and maintaining citizen trust.
Yeah, and to me, it's like I'm sure you all see, you can't look at the news lately about how divisive everybody is.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what you have to say. There's somebody against it, right?
Mhm.
And so I think what we really need to do is, in order to have that equity, the equal access of the services, we also need to build trust into those services as well, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. So, I think that this is it's true for the private sector entities, right? Where people want to make sure that the algorithms that are being sent to them are in their best interest as opposed to a company's interest. But in the public sector side, you also want to make sure it's in that citizen's interest, but also in it make sure that there aren't any biases baked in. And so, especially with AI, I see this playing a huge role when it comes to customer experience, right? And so, what AI is going to provide is it's going to make these services much more self-service, which opens up these services to reach a broader group of people. You're not constrained by the number of people working for your agency that provide these services if you could make it as self-service as possible, right?
Mhm.
But you got to have the trust in the application of that AI, and I really think the best way to garner that trust is through transparency and openness. And and this includes the inputs that go into training the AI to make sure that they weren't biased going in, but you also need to make sure that the outputs are reproducible and explainable, and so that if a decision is made, the citizen can understand why that decision was made instead of an answer coming out of a black box that nobody knows how that AI came to that decision,
Mhm.
right? And then the last thing is I think about having a closed loop system too. It's like, instead of just saying, no, you're not eligible, go away, there needs to be the way to, the football analogy is, throw the challenge flag, right? To say that, hey, I don't think this decision is right. And to get a human involved to say that, hey, I want to review the call, and I want to make sure that, um, that we did decide things properly. And the reality is that AI is not perfect,
Mhm.
because it's made by people, and people aren't perfect. And but if we're able to take these lessons learned through that closed loop,
Mhm.
we're able to feed that back into the AI to continually train it to improve it to make better decisions in the future.
Got it. And of course, this affects the workforce. What are the skill sets and the type of talent needed going forward to kind of bring this customer experience vision to life?
Yeah, and well, I look at it, I have yet to see an executive order over the past couple of years that doesn't mention people,
Yeah.
right? And it's really easy for us to get wrapped up in the technology, and we talk about things like modernization, and the first thing that comes to mind is the modernization of the applications. But
Mhm.
rarely do we first think about modernizing the skill sets of the people who made the legacy systems in the first place.
Right.
And meanwhile, those folks they're fighting fires, they're too busy to upskill themselves, and that ends up making the technical debt even worse. And especially as we start seeing I've been seeing it for years, that the number of people that are eligible to retire from the government keeps increasing. And we call it the great resignation now, where people are revisiting what's meaningful to them, and maybe they want to move on to their next act, whether it's retirement or a new career or something different. And but in order to create that time, to prevent the firefighting, I think what we really need to do is, not only make uh, the modernization of our workforce a priority of our leadership, we need to give the people, the workforce itself, time to do that upskilling.
Mhm.
And the best way to do that, to give them that time back, is through automation. And so if people can automate away a lot of the toil and drudgery, the things that are menial tasks that really don't contribute to the mission, automate them, right? So the cool thing there is that it frees up time for people to learn, but it also does the knowledge capture of what people have been doing to keep these critical systems up and running. It codifies that through automation as infrastructure as code, to make that reproducible as people move on to their next act.
Mhm. Right. And then they can focus on the really important decision making matters.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, as always, such a pleasure speaking with you, David. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I appreciate it.
Of course.